Hi, my name's Dave and welcome to the Skint Woodworker. In this series we're going to start looking at what to do in terms of I'm a beginner, I haven't got any tools, I haven't got a workshop, I haven't got any wood, and how can I start woodworking when I've got no real budget? We're going to work through a whole series of different projects and ways that we can work round not having various tools, etc. And we're going to start off with an absolute minimum. We're going to start off with just a handsaw, maybe a hammer. That would be quite useful. A tape measure we'll definitely need. Some form of square, but I've got a few workarounds for that, so stick around for that. And maybe a drill. But it doesn't have to be a fancy electric drill. It could quite as easily be a hand drill. A car boot sale or somewhere like that, something that you've picked up for a couple of quid. You don't need to have a fancy hand drill. Remember, all the world's great furniture was made with hand tools, not with power tools. And we can still make things to this day, really nice things. But we're going to start off with simple things, but things that can be made quickly, so that you feel like you're getting somewhere, you're producing something. And we'll take it from there, and we'll build up slowly, and we'll get into more and more interesting things and more creative things and different ways of approaching things, and how we can add on to tools, how we can repair tools that we've perhaps been given or found. And by found, I mean maybe Grandad's got a few things in his garden shed that might be a bit rusty, but we can clean them up and make them work again for us. And there's lots and lots of tools out there that are really good tools, but also possibly been abused or things like that. But can we turn those tools around and make them usable again? And we're going to take a close look at that, and we are actually going to repair some old bash tools that I found in car boot sales, and make them work for us. And then we're going to create projects using those tools. So please stick around for all of that. Okay, if you haven't got a workshop, maybe you've got a garage. If you haven't got a garage, then maybe you've got a garden shed. If you haven't got a garden shed, maybe that you've got a patio. If you haven't got a patio, maybe you've got a balcony. Just all you need is a small space to put some form of workbench. And ideally something like Black & Decker's Workmate would be a good start. You can find old ones at car boot sales, or you may already have something like that, or your father might have something like that. Or maybe the old-fashioned wooden sawhorse. And if you don't have one of those, we could look at actually making a sawhorse, so that you need a flat surface basically to work on, to put your wood on, so that you can cut it up into whatever sizes you need. So maybe we should start there. What work surface can I have if I haven't got a nice workshop with a big woodworking bench? Now this is the workmate that I'm going to use during this project. It's old and it's battered. You can see, if you look closely, it's full of paints. There's random drill holes in it. It's been well and truly abused, but it works. It still works. I do have somewhere the little plastic fixings that go in the top of it as well. So, but that will be an ideal platform. You can wind these in together so that you can make it into one flat platform, or you can move them at different positions. So it's quite handy. So it'll work as a vise, it'll work as a bench, and it's low enough that when you're sawing wood, you can put your piece of wood on the bench, like so. And you can also then get your knee on there, and then you would be able to saw onto the wood like so. So I can simply put my knee onto the piece of wood. I use my thumb against the saw blade there. And then I'll let the saw do the cutting. Now let's look at the business of actually marking out a piece of wood. Before we even make anything, let's just look at that one thing. Right, so I've got a board here. Okay, it's been cut, but the question I'm going to ask you is that end square? So let's put it on the floor. I'll bring the camera down so you can see it more clearly, and we'll see if it's square. And I'll show you a couple of little tricks as to how to double check that it is actually square. Here's our piece of wood. We want to know if that edge is square or not before we can start measuring to make anything. Now if you've got a set square, this is an old-fashioned joiner's one, we can see that it isn't actually square. You might have a square like this, an adjustable set square. These are really handy if you've got one of those. But again, you can see it's not square. But what happens if you haven't got either of those things? What do you do then? Well, one thing you can do, take a piece of wood, as long as it's straight, and put it against the edge of your board. Take a piece of paper, this is just an ordinary A4 piece of paper, and it will actually tell you whether the board is square or not, which it isn't. Let's just move that paper along a little bit. So what we could do now, if we press down the paper, we can move that board out of the way. If we draw a pencil line along the edge of this, if it's tricky, what I would suggest you do is just mark this end and mark that end. Oops, there we go. And now we've got a line to work to. So we could cut that. Now it is a little bit trickier on the edge like that. You simply get your piece of paper, and if you're very careful and you've got a ruler, let me just grab I've got a little ruler here. Actually, I'll need a bigger one for this. So I've got a foot ruler. What we could do is we could measure here. Let's say we measure 25 millimeters. We measured the other end at 25 millimeters. We then put our ruler between the two, and we've got ourselves a parallel line. But before you lift the tape measure off, just fold the paper up. In fact, I'm actually going to use the ruler just to do that. Got a nice crisp line. Now, if we put our piece of paper onto that edge now, as long as that crease sits on the corner, we can see quite clearly that it gives you a nice square edge. So that you could actually square your board with a piece of paper. And if you haven't got anything other tools like either of these, then that's exactly what I would do to get around that problem. Now we can cut that board, and if we're careful and cut along that line, then from there we can then measure with our tape measure, but we'll be measuring from that point whatever size we actually need to start making. So that's how we're going to make a start. So if you take a look up here, or up here, depending on where I put the link, the first project we're going to make is going to be a bird box. Sounds simple. It is simple, and if you follow these steps, you'll be successful with it. So please click on the link above, and don't forget, it really helps if you give us a like, leave a comment if you can, and if there's something in particular you don't understand, or there's something that you really would like to make, and are not sure how to start, please leave a little suggestion down in the comment section. Anyway, don't forget to like, subscribe if you can, it's absolutely free, and ring the notification bell. And that way the elves at YouTube will let you know when I upload the next video. Thank you very much for listening to me. I'm Dave, and this is the Skint Woodworker. See you soon. Bye now. To get that absolutely square, and that's where something like an ordinary square comes in, because then you can put the square onto there and you can mark your line down there quite easily, and you could do that on both sides of the board. Like so. There isn't an easy workaround for that I can think of off the top of my head, unless you simply get your piece of paper, and if you're very careful and you've got a ruler, let me just grab I've got a little ruler here. Actually, I'll need a bigger one for this. So I've got a foot ruler. What we could do is we could measure here. Let's say we measure 25 millimeters. We measured the other end at 25 millimeters. We then put our ruler between the two, and we've got ourselves a parallel line. But before you lift the tape measure off, just fold the paper up. In fact, I'm actually going to use the ruler just to do that. Got a nice crisp line. Now, if we put our piece of paper onto that edge now, as long as that crease sits on the corner, we can see quite clearly that it gives you a nice square edge. So that you could actually square your board with a piece of paper. And if you haven't got anything other tools like either of these, then that's exactly what I would do to get around that problem. Now we can cut that board, and if we're careful and cut along that line, then from there we can then measure with our tape measure, but we'll be measuring from that point whatever size we actually need to start making.